Before we dive in, this week's episode is brought to you by my free cheat sheet, 30 Top Tips to Find Time to Write. In this guide, I give you 30 ways that you can find time to write in the small gaps that appear between the various errands and tasks and responsibilities that you have in your day-to-day life. Now, you might be thinking that you don't have any time to spare, but I can guarantee these top tips will give you writing time you didn't think you had. If you thought writing always involved a pen and paper or a keyboard, think again. If you thought you needed at least an hour at a time to write your manuscript, I help you reframe that. You won't be disappointed. Get your free copy of 30 Top Tips to Find Time to Write by going to emmadesi.com/30 Top Tips. Okay, let's dive in to today's episode. Caroline Woods is the author of the novels Fräulein M from Gallery Books and The Lunar Housewife, which is forthcoming from Doubleday in 2022 this year. She is represented by Shannon Hassan of Marshall Lyon Literary Agency and has taught creative writing at Loyola University Chicago, Boston University and the Boston Conservatory at Berklee College of Music. In 2008, she completed an MFA in creative writing at BU, where she earned a bachelor's degree from the University of Virginia. As a teenager, she published a book of ghost stories called Haunted Delaware, which received praise as a self-publishing success story in The Village Voice, Writer's Digest, and other publications. She lives just outside Chicago, Illinois, with her husband and 2 daughters. And so let's delve straight into our interview. Well, hello, Caroline. It is lovely to have you here. Thank you very, very much for joining me today.
Hello, Emma. Thank you so much for having me on your show.
It's a pleasure. It's a pleasure. I wonder if you wouldn't mind just starting off by telling us about your journey to publication, because I always love hearing about how people got to where they are now.
Oh boy. Okay. It's a little bit of a long story. I think that's common among writers. I started out at 22 years old thinking I was going to write the great American novel. I had a novel draft. I think it was at one point 450 pages long. And I had an agent for a little while then, and the book didn't go anywhere. You know, she sent it to everybody in publishing and, it wasn't published, which was very disappointing to me at the time, but now I think it was a good thing. So that I used a chapter of that as the main piece of my application to MFA programs. And it got me into, BU, which was a great experience and introduced me to some mentors and also friends who I'm still in a writing group with all these years later. That was in 2008 and we are all still friends, which is great. So I did my MFA and then while I was in the MFA program, I started working on another novel, called Fräulein M, which eventually was published. And coming out of grad school, I worked on that book for probably another, let me think. I came out of grad school in 2008 and I worked on that book for another 4 years and then started trying to get an agent. And my agent process, my agent search took about 1.5 years, during which I got a lot of rejection, but a lot of helpful feedback with that rejection and worked on the book a lot more, continued working with my writing group. Finally got an agent, Shannon Hassan, in 2014. And then she pitched that book to publishers. And in 2016, I got a book contract for Fräulein M. And it was initially with an independent publisher called Tyrus Books. It doesn't exist anymore. They ended up being purchased by Simon & Schuster, absorbed into Simon & Schuster, actually in the middle of my publishing journey. So right before the book came out in stores, everything shifted. My book was now part of Simon & Schuster. And I got a new editor, which was, sad for my previous editor because this, man had, taken a chance on me, an unknown writer, and then he ended up getting downsized. So my book came out, that Fräulein M came out in January 2017. And then I started working on another one. Because Simon and Schuster had absorbed my contract, I had, like a right of first refusal for future works with them.
I might come back to that if I can.
Oh, absolutely.
So first of all, congratulations on, finding an agent, getting the book sold. And I'm going to ask you about Simon Schuster in a minute, whether that was exciting, a good thing or a bad thing. So we shall find out. But your journey to public, I've got so many questions already for you about that. So you said that you had an agent prior to this. So how did you acquire your very first agent?
My very first agent was actually somebody I was working for. So my second job out of college was reading queries at a boutique, mostly nonfiction agency in Manhattan. So I was the one in charge of reading sometimes thousands of query letters a week, usually hundreds. Not necessarily the most encouraging job for an aspiring author, but I think it gave me a lot of insight into what would capture the attention of the often 20-something person who is the first line of defense, when you're trying to approach an agent. And I do think it helped me later to write a good query letter.
Ah, that's fascinating. I don't know why, but in my head, the person reading the query letters is someone middle to older aged, experienced, knows what they're looking for, but not someone out of college who, woohoo, first job in publishing. This is super exciting.
Not necessarily. Yeah. And when I've had publishing students, I often tell them, think, someone with a short attention span is reading these and it'll help you grab that, you really got to get their attention quickly because it may be a 22-year-old like I was who's reading hundreds at a time. Yeah.
Oh, brilliant insight there. I'm so glad you shared that with us. The other thing then you said that interested me was that the agent at the time took the manuscript but couldn't sell it.
Right.
And you said, turns out that was a good thing. So what do you mean when you said that? Why, looking back, do you realize that was a good thing?
Oh, I think the quality of my own writing has improved so much since then. And I don't know. I don't know if I would totally regret having that book out in the world, but I think my writing got so much better. And then when the piece of it got me into the MFA, I really felt like, okay, this is what this book was meant to do. It was not meant to be read. It could have gotten really bad reviews or something. And again, that's not a death sentence for your writing, but it probably wasn't meant to be on the shelf.
That's wonderful, though. What a great way of seeing that, though, that it was meant to be the piece that got you into that MFA. So I love that. So you did your MFA at BU. Is that Boston University?
Yes, I'm sorry, Boston University. Yes.
Okay, cool. And I've written a manuscript which turned out to be Fräulein M. So it took you 4 years to do that one.
Yes.
That I think to so many of the people listening will be. I think it might surprise some people that it took long, because we think of, the majority of my audience, they're at home, they're on their own, they're reading craft books, they're going to webinars, they're trying to muscle through by themselves. And so many of them have been writing for in some cases, decades. So I was thinking it probably will surprise some people to know that even when you are in an MFA program, even when you've got people around you, and you've got the education, it still takes time to write that book. And have you, because I know you've written your second book now, your second published book. Is that your average length of time to write a book, or is your process kind of sped up a little bit?
No, it's sped up a lot. And I think that was part of the reason why the Lunar Housewife was more successful. I changed my habit completely. I think I used to think from start to finish, it was probably about 8 years working on Fräulein M. If you count the time that it was in submission, because it changed a lot based on feedback in the agent submission and then even in the editor submission period. We did some rewrites. So 7 or 8 years. The Lunar Housewife, which is coming out next month from Doubleday, I wrote in really a few months and totally different. And I think that, I used to think, and I had a full-time job when I was writing for Line M. And I know that's the reality for a lot of people, almost everybody. Or you're taking care of children or someone else, or, people have life that gets in the way of writing. I think what I used to believe was that you write when you can find time, and then you write as much as you possibly can in that one sitting. So I would write 3,000 words sometimes, or 5,000 once in a while in one day. And then I would put it away for sometimes 5-6 days. Oh, these days I don't have time to write, or I'm not in the mood, or, too much is going on, or whatever. I think it's better. It ended up being better for me to write a smaller amount every single day. And I know that that's not rocket science. People have probably heard that in their craft books, but for some reason I never internalized it until spring of 2020. And part of the reason was I was writing, The Lunar Housewife has an extended cameo from Ernest Hemingway, and he's in an interview with an aspiring writer. And I was thinking, well, what would he really have said to an aspiring writer? Like, what was his writing advice? And I found this piece where he said, have your count, don't get behind in your count. You have to meet your word quota every day, essentially. But he also said the trick to doing that is to stop while you're ahead and stop in the middle of an idea. And that ended up being really revolutionary for me, because I think I would feel as if I've got to finish this chapter today because I may not write for another week. And I'd try to get to the end of it. And sometimes I would. Well, then when you return, you're kind of returning cold, because you've got to start something brand new, a new chapter, a new scene when you come back. I started doing the Hemingway thing. I would even stop mid-sentence sometimes. And it is glorious because you get to return the next day and you're kind of in that stream of thought. You know exactly what you're going to say. And it worked. It just worked. It was amazing. And it was spring 2020. I think a lot of us felt as if this was a concentrated period. We're not going to be in lockdown for that long. And I thought, well, I'm going to just really focus on this now. I'm going to finish this book while we're all isolated and not doing anything else, and could really apply that Hemingway advice, because it felt like such a concentrated, focused time. But next time I write a book, I'm going to have to duplicate that. I'm going to have to replicate those conditions and try the starting in the middle every day thing, because it did really help.
Yeah, well, that's so great to hear. It's something I think works for a lot of people, and some people are resistant to it because they do believe that they've got to have 2 or 3 hours at a time to really focus and get into the groove of it. But actually, if you are writing every day, just a little bit every day, you fall into the groove straight away, because as you say, you're kind of mid through. There's nothing to get into the groove of. You're already there.
You're in the groove.
You're already in it. I think it was Thomas Hardy. That was his technique as well. That's what he used to do. He'd get up at 5 or something and write, and then 8:30 or 8 o'clock on the dot, he'd put his pen down and he went to the post office where he worked. So that was his way of doing it as well. And, he was very prolific and did very well. So it's not a bad technique to follow.
Yeah, it's worth a try if it's something you, like me, hadn't tried before.
So thank you for sharing that. That's really, I think that will inspire some people. And the final question I was curious about was the Simon and Schuster element. So I imagine that was quite a scary time then, because we know from the media that it's quite volatile, the publishing world.
Yeah.
So that excitement of your agent sold the book and it's going to be really exciting, and then your publisher gets bought out. And I guess, was there a moment where you weren't sure if they would take your manuscript with them, or was that always okay? You always knew they would buy the manuscript too? We'll be back after this quick break.
Hello, welcome to the Redfern Book Review podcast. I am your host, Amy Mayer. And if you're a reader, I think my show might just be for you. What I do is I take a deep dive into the books you've been wanting to read, other books you've never heard of, and we talk about all things literary. Think public radio meets your book club via your best friend. We talk to authors, my friends, and I just add personal musings. It's a lot of fun.
I think I knew it was immediately phrased to me as something exciting. So I knew that they were going to keep my book, and my book was pretty far along when the news came through. I think I heard about it in December of 2016, and then my book was supposed to come out. Fräulein M was coming out on January 10th. So, that piece was, not as scary.
Okay.
It became disappointing when the editor who had fallen in love with my book ended up having to leave. Yeah. And, that was sad. And I've heard that has happened to other people for other reasons. Maybe their editor just takes a job somewhere else or leaves publishing. You get assigned to a new editor, and I think sometimes it can work out. And sometimes, you and your new editor just don't have the chemistry that you had with your previous one. Mm-hmm. So,
because it's really a relationship, isn't it, between you and an editor, the writer and the editor, and this kind of meeting of the minds about this manuscript and what it can do.
Yes. And also the fact that, an acquiring editor is staking a piece of their career on your work. And, when they are personally the one who has chosen to bring you in to the publishing house, they have to, they have to make a pitch to their editorial board, and they're emotionally invested in your success. So to, lose that is hard, but it all worked out.
Yeah. I mean, now, I've been published by Simon and Schuster. That's not a bad thing to have on your resume. Oh, thank you for that. Because there are lots of interesting things just in that, lots of nuggets for us newbies just in that introduction there. So thank you. But let's talk about your novels. I'd love to chat about those as well.
Sure.
And so let's start with Fräulein M. So what inspired you to write a story about the CIA's influence on American arts and letters? It's a big topic. Yeah.
Oh, so that's the Lunar Housewife.
Okay. I beg your pardon.
That's okay. You know what? This is a really good opportunity to talk about agents and collaboration. It came out of a conversation with my agent, who I love and, have a really good creative partnership with. When I was, trying to think of an idea for the next book, we were just kind of tossing around historical ideas, and she knew I had written Fräulein M. It takes place mid-20th century, historical. And she said, have you ever heard this rumor / story that the CIA, was involved in creating arts propaganda during the Cold War? And I didn't know anything about it. So that was all she said. And I thought, well, I'm going to go look into that. And one of the first things that I came across was the story of the Paris Review. So it's been confirmed now that the Paris Review was actually funded by the CIA. It was initially a cover for Peter Matheson to act as an agent, a spy on other writers. They paid for that Paris apartment where they founded the Paris Review. And then for years afterward, George Plimpton was really the one who worked with them, on, reprints and interviews. He would kind of collude with the Congress for Cultural Freedom, which was a CIA front, on bringing out, pro-West, anti-communist kind of interviews and essays, and promoting people like Boris Pasternak, who's Dr. Zhivago couldn't be published in Russia. They were like hand in hand with the CIA. So when I read all of that, I thought, this is ripe for a novel. And it only seemed to make sense to tell the novel from the point of view of a woman, because it was often female journalists who really ended up bringing a lot of this stuff to light. Like Frances Stoner Saunders is one of the best known writers. She wrote a huge, great book called The Cultural Cold War, which is all about all the ways that the CIA had their hands in, art and literature and journalism. So the Lunar Housewife is about a young woman journalist who is dating the founder of a literary magazine, and she slowly uncovers their involvement with the CIA, to her own peril and the peril of the people around her.
Oh, okay. So lots of intrigue. Is it a thriller?
I think Doubleday is classifying it as a historical thriller. So there are thriller elements, life and death consequences.
Okay, it's right up my alley. I think so. I'll be definitely, and next month you say it's going to be out. Do you know what the release date?
June 14th.
June 14th. Cool. Okay. Oh, well, by the time this goes live, it will be out. So I will be sure to link to your website and where the people can purchase it, where I can purchase it.
Thank you so much.
So we've got a nice feel for the story now, the kind of the setting, the espionage, the double dealing. And you've mentioned a few of the real life people in there. So did you have them in mind when you were writing the story, or did they come to mind as you wrote?
The characters?
Yeah, the real life characters.
I always knew that I wanted to include Hemingway, because he was somewhat, he's mentioned when you read some stories about like whose art, the CIA wanted to promote, like Hemingway was our big star writer of the 20th century. And so they really wanted to promote him abroad, but they also really wanted to make sure he didn't say anything too pro-Cuba. So he felt like a really good person to include, and to have Louise Lighthouser, my protagonist, interview, because she's getting these juicy bits that he's saying about Fidel Castro, and she really wants to put them in her interview, and then the guys cut it out. So, there's also the question of sexism, like they're overly editing her piece and not trusting her. So there's the piece of, is it sexism or is it censorship or is it both? But yeah, the real life people who are in the book came to mind as I was doing research, like who would have been at a swanky literary party in Manhattan in 1953. And then it was really fun to populate, the book with those people.
Oh, I bet it was the glamour and the glitz. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
And as you were doing your research about the CIA, about the Cold War, were there any sort of juicy tidbits that you came across that you found that you really loved, but you couldn't quite fit into the novel?
Oh yeah, that's a great question. So I actually found a transcript from Langston Hughes's testimony before the Senate Committee on Un-American Activities. And right in the transcript, a senator, and forgive me, I don't remember who it was, but a senator said to Langston Hughes, they're trying to figure out if he's a communist. They're asking him all these questions. Have you been to Russia? Blah, blah, blah. And then they said, I think they were like reading pieces of his poetry aloud. Is this communist poetry? And one of the senators came right out and said, we have promoted your books abroad. There were programs where the government would send American literature and poetry to libraries abroad as sort of representatives of our culture. And the senator uses the word propaganda. We propagandize this. So are we safe to do so? Essentially, it's right there. You can't deny that our government was taking art and trying to use it as propaganda to win the cultural Cold War against communism. And I wanted to include that in the novel because I would have liked to have my protagonist, as she's being gaslit by her male colleagues. No, you're crazy. We're not, the government would never get involved with the arts. She could say, here it is. It's right here in print. But that Senate, transcript wouldn't have been available to somebody then. So I couldn't include it in the book. I did include a reference to it. They're discussing Langston Hughes. And it comes up in conversation that he testified before the Senate. But I couldn't say what he said exactly because they wouldn't have had access to that information.
No. That would have been good. Yeah. And so doing the research, has it been quite interesting, especially now that we've got this distance between that period of American history and now? Has it kind of changed the way that you've seen the government back then, or even the governments globally now? Has it changed your view of world politics at all and how you see it, or do you try not to kind of get too involved with that side of things? We'll be back after this quick break.
Hi, I'm Jill Jardine, host of Cosmic Scene with Jill Jardine. Check out this cutting-edge podcast, which brings you astrological updates and sun sign forecasts, as well as astrological insights and psychic hits on current and upcoming events, including astrological analysis of cryptocurrency trajectories. Cosmic Scene with Jill Jardine also features guests who are healers, yogis, mystics, mediums, and more. All movers and shakers in the consciousness shifting movement. Tune in and turn on.
I think I'm similar to a lot of Americans in that the more I've learned about the CIA over the course of my adult life, the more you realize like how much control the U.S. has had in so many other countries. I didn't know anything, I think, until college about the CIA helping to depose the democratically elected leader in Iran in 1953. And, everything that they were involved in Latin America. And then to hear this about the use of art, in a sense, it's more peaceful because they're using soft power to try to influence world politics, but it's still, leaves you with a much more complicated and uncomfortable feeling about the way that, the CIA was covertly trying to influence world events that maybe should have been left alone. Yeah. I think, learning that they often used artists without the artists' knowledge, like setting up front organizations. I heard a story on a great podcast called Wind of Change by Patrick Radden Keefe, about Nina Simone going to this symposium in Africa that she thought was organic. It's a gathering of the African diaspora, and she was excited to participate, and it was set up by the CIA. So, the podcast interviewed a really good friend of hers who went on the trip with her, and the interviewer said, do you think she would have been disappointed or wouldn't have even gone if she knew the CIA was involved? And the friend said, yeah, she wouldn't have wanted to participate in that. So, that's disappointing. And I think what it makes you wonder is, what's going on today that we don't know about. If all this was happening in 1953 and, the average citizen and average, even very sophisticated artist was totally unaware sometimes, then what's happening now?
Yeah, it does, doesn't it? And, and I don't for a second think it was just the CIA. I do not doubt for a moment that British intelligence was also involved in all of these tactics as well. And I agree. I suspect a lot of it goes on, but it'll be a little bit more covert now with the use of the internet, and
right.
It can be more strategic now, I would imagine, than ever before. It's fascinating stuff, and if you think too much about it, it's probably quite frightening as well. But it is. I feel that your book is very timely because there does seem to be a resurgence in interest in the Cold War and what it was like at that time. I've noticed myself just around and about, the Care's books seem to be back in fashion, and there's more adaptations. People are kind of interested in that time again, and whether it's because of what's going on currently with Russia and Ukraine and things, but there's definitely an appetite for it, and could simply be that enough time has passed, and so we've got a nostalgic view on it. We can see it with a little bit of a distance now. And I was talking to my mum, I think, about the 50s, and she was saying genuinely people were terrified. People were really scared, and they did do in schools, they did in Britain anyway, I'm sure in the States too, air raid shelter practice runs and stuff, and it was a genuine concern, which to my younger self was like, what? That seems crazy and ludicrous now, but at the time I think it was a genuine worry for people.
Oh yeah, I put a scare in the Lunar Housewife. There's an air raid siren that goes off, and she has a man in her apartment who's not supposed to be there, and it causes all kinds of trouble for her later. But they have to run down to the shelter, and they're genuinely terrified. And that was something that came up as I was doing my research. One of the source materials that I relied on a lot was Anne Roife's book, Art and Madness, because Anne Roife was very much in that literary set in Manhattan during the Cold War in the 60s. But she spoke about being genuinely afraid. You think you could be vaporized in a moment. And that's probably one of the big differences in terms of how I think Americans are watching what's happening in Ukraine now. Is we feel a sense of remove. I don't think we feel as much danger as they did then. It's not personal, but of course we're horrified by seeing what's happening to Ukrainians. But yeah, it seems like in the early Cold War, there was this very real fear that it could become a hot war at any moment, and it might be without warning.
Yeah. Oh, yes.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you for sharing that with us. It's interesting to learn about your research and how fun it sounds, actually. It sounds like it was very interesting. And I'm looking forward to the book coming out. But I want to turn again to sort of ideas of, the idea of productivity and how you wrote your books in between raising a family, in between teaching, because a lot of my listeners are, they have a full-time job, they have caring responsibilities, and they're looking to make that space in their life, and it's always inspiring to hear how other people have done it. So what were your you did your little bits of writing every day. Did you find that you wrote at the same time every day, or did you learn to be flexible with that?
I was doing it at night after my kids went to bed. And I think this was 2 years ago. I think they were going to bed earlier than they do now. My kids, okay, let me think. Spring 2020 were 5 and 2, almost 2. And I would put them to bed and then write for about an hour. So I wasn't, and that goes along with my, personal circadian rhythm. I think I'm more of a night person. So instead of waking up at 5, I was going to bed at 11. And that worked. And it's funny. It really was, it felt like this can work only if it's a temporary thing. And I had to do it that way because my kids were not in school. There was no childcare. And sometimes my husband would take them out for the weekend, and I would do a little weekend daytime work, but most of it was every night. And I don't know, there was a nice piece to it, I think, because parents would understand this. Knowing that the kids were asleep meant there was no chance of interruption. And even when I think your kids are at school or daycare or with a nanny or somewhere else, there's the possibility you're going to get a phone call, somebody needs new pants or something like that. So it was the quietest time I've ever had writing. And I do think, I was more focused because I had kids, and I had learned to, appreciate that time, that free time. That, I look back on when I was younger, single, and I think, well, why didn't you find the time then? But I don't know. I just couldn't, I don't know. I couldn't find the motivation as much then. So now it'll be really interesting when I go to start writing my next book, which I plan to do pretty soon, maybe right after the Lunar Housewife comes out. Will I be able, what will my routine be? And now I have a babysitter. I have, the kids are in school. So I'll have to find that daily routine that's just as productive. But the nighttime thing worked then.
You said something interesting about it, though, that it was, I think you said, I'm paraphrasing, but because it was temporary for the length of writing it, then it was doable. But yeah, if you had to do that every day of every week, that would be less sustainable. And I think that's something really worth bearing in mind for our listeners, is that intense first drafting period, particularly, it's not for forever. It is for a shorter period of time. And if you can get up that hour earlier or go to bed that hour later for 3 or 4 months to get it done, then it's worth it.
Yeah. And then you have the product, you have the thing, a book with a beginning and an end. And then, you may need to do heavy revision, which everybody does. But at least there it is. There's the thing. So I do think it can be worth really concentrating and putting some other things aside in that 3 or 4 month period to get that draft done. And then later, I didn't do much nighttime revision, for example. My agent and I did some revisions in July 2020, even into the fall, actually. I think because I got my book deal in December. So we must have been revising the rest of that year. And that I did more casually, not casually, but not every single day, not as intense. So you can always reward yourself later with more free time.
And so in that first drafting stage, were you doing that entirely on your own? Was it just, you in a bubble, or did you work with your agent on that first draft? How did that work for you? Because I think there is that Hemingway kind of image that you are intense, alone. You write on your own in a vacuum almost. But is that the reality? Did you work with people, bounce ideas around as you were writing, or did they come in at the end?
I think what I did was finish the whole thing. And I sent it to my agent, I remember, on the 4th of July. It was complete. And I don't think I brought anyone in during that time. I think it would have tripped me up a little bit because there was always a delay in terms of reading time. Would I have kept writing in those days? Would I have stopped? In order to get that draft done, I didn't show it to anybody. But then as soon as it was done, I sent it to my agent. And I remember her saying, it had a saggy middle. So I had a lot of, I had to look at my character's motivation, the main character's motivation and actions in the middle, and have her do more. She had to become a lot more active. We did that. And then I think she's also suggested getting some beta reads at that point too. So I had half a dozen writers and friends read it and give me more feedback. And that led to the more final version that we sent out in the late fall.
Okay. So there was a bit of toing and froing and getting some feedback, and then the beta readers, and then feeling good about it. Fantastic. It's nice to see how the professionals are doing it, in their traditional houses. It's always interesting. So we're almost at our time together. It's flown by, actually.
Oh yeah, it's been great.
It's gone very quick. So I really appreciate you opening up and sharing about your process and what goes on behind the scenes of writing a novel, and then sharing with us the fun stuff as well, what the book's about and the interesting research that you did. You mentioned that you may be starting your next book after the release of The Lunar Housewife. is there anything you can tell us about that at the moment?
Sure. I'm bouncing between two ideas actually. But they both take place in, kind of a more rugged Gilded Age. So 1885, Chicago, like the Chicago meatpacking baron type industry and the Badlands of North Dakota is what I want to write about. And I've been really wanting to include an extended cameo from a young Theodore Roosevelt. So it'll be one of two ideas. And I kind of am going to like just write a little bit of each one and figure out which characters I like better. But related to, kind of the awakening that that some society Americans came to about how to take care of every American. You know, it was an era when I think people were waking up a little bit to like, no, we cannot let people live in overcrowded slums without water, hot water, sanitation, food. You know, it was this huge wave of immigrants had just come here, and I want to look at the time when people were figuring out that they had to create humane conditions for the new population of Americans.
Oh, fascinating. You love big subjects. Kind of
yeah, I do.
Science subjects. Yeah. I was just looking back over at your bio. And did you study history or anything at school or uni, or is it just an interest you have?
No, I was an English major. But I think history always comes in, you know, you can't study, they're so closely related. So when you're an English major, you're learning a lot of history. I think my favorite, class I took in college was, called Modern Irish Lit, and it started in 1798 and then went to today. It was such a great class, but you can't read modern Irish literature without learning the whole history. So I've always, approached literature through history, but I love sci-fi. I mean, there's a little bit of sci-fi in the Lunar Housewife, the novel within a novel that Louise is writing is sci-fi romance. Cause I thought, what should she be writing that the censors would hate? You know, that her boyfriend is just gonna, he's gonna hate it. And I thought, a romance on the moon with a Soviet space captain. So that's it. So that's in the Lunar Housewife. So I love that stuff too. But yeah, I guess I'm always just drawn to historical topics.
Oh, well, you're going to love doing the research for that. I'm sure that's going to bring up a lot of interesting things.
Thank you.
Caroline, it's been lovely. A real pleasure. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you, Emma. Thanks so much for having me on.
If you're a first-time novelist who is struggling to either finish your novel or get those revisions to where you want them to be, then I've got just the thing for you. I have a small group coaching program which runs over 12 months, and over the course of that program I will help you fix those plot problems that you've been struggling with. I'll help you get under the surface of your characters so you really get to know them and what's driving them. And crucially for you, I give you that self-belief that you need to get you through the roller coaster that is writing a novel so that you can carry on, get to the end and get your book, your story out into the world so it can change people's lives. If that sounds good to you, if that is something that you'd be interested in doing, I know I can help you get to where you want to be. So book a call with me. Let's have a chat and see if we are a good fit for each other. If you're interested in doing that, then go to emmadesi.com/story builder. I look forward to chatting. Well, thank you so much for joining me today. I hope you found that helpful and inspirational. Now, don't forget to come on over to Facebook and join my group, Turning Readers into Writers. It is especially for you if you are a beginner writer who is looking to write their first novel. If you join the group, you will also find a free cheat sheet there called 3 Secret Hacks to Write with Consistency. So go to emmadesi.com/turning readers into writers. Hit join. Can't wait to see you in there. All right. Thank you. Bye-bye.